Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new episode of NuReview. Today I am going to be doing a review of Gary Numan's 1981 album, Dance. I'm going to try to see it on the front and the back. Dance is released in September of 1981, almost a year to the day after the release of Telecon in 1980. At the beginning of 1981, Gary Numan announces his retirement from touring. The retirement is only going to be short-lived. He ends up doing a tour in 1982 throughout the US, and then from there continues to tour regularly. On Dance, a lot of the lineup over the last few albums is gone. He still has Paul Gardner, who does keyboards, guitar, and co-writes one song on the album, Night Talk. Cedric Sharpley is going to be doing some drumming on a handful of songs on the album, and Chris Payne is going to be playing viola on 2 or 3 songs. The rest of the album is going to be primarily just Gary. He's even going to be playing bass on 1 or 2 songs on the album. It does also feature contributions by Nash the Slash, who's going to be playing violin on a few songs, Roger Taylor of Queen, who's going to drum on a couple of songs, but most importantly, Mick Karn from the album Japan is going to be playing bass on 4 of the songs on the album. And 3 of the songs that he plays on, opener Slowcar to China, A Subway Called You, and My Brother's Time, are actually going to be 3 of the most ambient feeling songs on the album. Musically, this does not really follow Telecon the same way that Telecon followed the Pleasure Principle, or the Pleasure Principle followed Replicas, in that Dance is a very artsy, dense, atmospheric, borderline ambient pop album. And the opening song, Slowcar to China, really does embody that whole feeling. The song is a little over 9 minutes long, features Mick Karn playing this really deep, ominous, fretless bass line over this drum machine before these really slow, moody synths come in. And Gary opens the song by introducing us to the main character of the song, who is a Chinese prostitute. He opens the song with the lines, "She'll take a slow car to China, she'll pay the rent for the use of you." And then later on in the song he even goes so far as to say, "I'm in love with this elegant bitch." And the lyrics on this album really are taking a detour from the lyrical themes of the last 3 or even 4 albums. Two-Way Army's debut album was almost just a standard punk rock affair with very oblique lyrics, themes of machinery here and there, but Replicas, The Pleasure Principle, and Telecon are rightly referred to as Gary Numan's Machine Trilogy. And on Dance, the machine imagery has completely gone, and instead it's all replaced with songs about heartbreak, or about prostitutes, or about just women in general, but none of the songs on here are referring to women in a very positive light. Towards the end of the song, Chris Payne, his viola comes in, and it kind of cuts through this very dense, this very murky, atmospheric music that has been going on for the better part of the last 6 or 7 minutes. And it's right before Gary says, "I forget not to call," and it's this very atmospheric, this very dramatic moment that really sets that part of the song apart from everything that came before it, because everything that came before it was this very slow, it's very ominous build up, and then all of a sudden Gary just like yells, and it just breaks through that dense, murky instrumentation that's been going on for the better part of the song. And then the second song, Night Talk, opens up with this really loud, stuttering drum machine intro that could be used to possibly wake up everybody who fell asleep during the last song. And the song, even though Paul Gardner is writing it and he plays guitar and keyboards on it, he actually doesn't play bass on the song. The bass duties are actually handled by Gary Numan, and if you didn't know any better, you would think that this could possibly be Mick Karn playing the bass on this song. lyrically, the song deals with this woman who's addicted to drugs and the boys that come out to see her. And Gary is just he's very disgusted by it, he's very repulsed by it, but at the same time he seems almost very vaguely aroused by it. One of my favorite lines of the song is he says, "Do you laugh when the rats come out to play?" And musically, this is a much more up-tempo song than Slowcar to China. It's going to be one of the more up-tempo songs on the album. Almost this entire album, like I said earlier, almost falls into this very textured, this very slowly evolving realm of art pop. And the third song, A Subway Called You, is very reminiscent of Slowcar to China. It does open very slowly. Mick Karn does play bass on this song again. He has this intro on it that's just this great bass opening. And actually Cedric Sharpley's playing drums on this song, and once he comes in, he really does pick up the tempo a bit. The song starts going a little bit faster. And lyrically, this is another song about prostitution. Mick Karn plays, as well as bass, he plays this really haunting saxophone solo towards the end of the song. And towards the end of the song, all the really moody instrumentation that's been playing so far, as well as Ced Sharpley's very driving drums, they all come together and they all pick up a little bit more as the vocals become a little bit more emotional, a little bit more frenetic, a little bit more in your face. And the whole ending of it is actually, to me, it's very reminiscent of the ending of Sleep by Windows from the Telecon album, where all the instruments came together and just starts chugging along, gets faster and faster and faster. And the ending of A Subway Called You is almost exactly like that. The fourth song on the album is Cry the Clock Said. Cry the Clock Said is the longest song that Gary Numan has ever put to record. It's just under 10 minutes long. And it opens with this really simplistic, exotic sounding drum machine, and we get this really atmospheric, almost like treated violin solo by Nash the Slash, who plays underneath it for about the first 2 minutes. And he's using the violin less for leads and playing notes and more for the atmosphere that the instrument is giving. 2 minutes in, we get these really shimmering, cascading keyboard parts that come in over the violin, and then they and the violin fade out, and then there's this really somber keyboard bit that's played for the next couple of minutes, and it's actually 5 minutes into the song before Gary Numan begins singing. And he sings, "Why cry now? It's over. Feelings change." And then Nash the Slash's violin comes back in and those cascading keyboard bits come in, while Gary mutters a little bit about what can only be a emotional breakup. And one of my favorite lyrics on the entire album is in this song. Right before he finishes singing, the last lines that Gary Numan sings in this song are, "How could I be surprised? How could I even believe? I'll forget who you are. I'll forget one of these days." And ironically, this song, for being the longest song on the album, has the least amount of lyrics of any song on this album. And this, instrumentally, really is as ambient as Gary Numan is going to get pretty much for the entirety of his career. I mean, like the part before he starts singing, and it's just this really plaintive keyboard line, and just those exotic drum machine fills. I mean, it's a borderline ambient pop song, and it's a really beautiful, moving piece. And then the second side opens with the song "She's Got Claws." This is the single from the album, and up to this point in his career, this is as funky as Gary Numan has gotten. It's got these very aggressive, driving, almost slapped bass lines by Mick Karn, these really aggressive saxophone solos that come in every now and then, also played by Mick Karn, and it's just got hand claps all over the place. And unfortunately, Gary is almost going to base the entire sound of his next album, I Assassin, off of the sound of this single song. I mean, for me at least, it's a harmless pop song. It doesn't really do much anything for me, and up to this point, it's the worst song on the album. That being said, it kind of does make sense that this is going to be the single from the album. It's the most sing-along song on the album, but how up-tempo it is and almost how like feel-good it is at times, it really is not indicative of really the entirety of the rest of the album. And then after She's Got Claws, we've got Crash, which to me, I feel like this could have been the single. Instrumentally, it's the song that most brings up how the previous album Telecon sounded. It has these very distorted guitars, it has this really driving percussion, it's got these really fun, in-your-face keyboard lines, and also features Roger Taylor from Queen on the drums. And Gary's continually yelling, "You don't know just what it's like to crash the driver," and he's just almost like screaming it in some parts. And his vocal delivery and just the overall sound of the song, it reminds me a lot of the song I'm an Agent from the previous album Telecon. But unlike the previous song, She's Got Claws, one of the reasons why I really like Crash is that it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, it doesn't go on longer than it needs to, and it just doesn't feel silly. It actually feels like Gary is emotionally in the song. After this, you have Boys Like Me, which is another moody song. It really kind of slows the album down, especially after the last couple of songs. It has this really heavily processed guitar. This one is actually courtesy of Rob Dean, who is also from the band Japan with Mick Karn. Gary's continually saying in this really deep voice, "The sun's all right," and he's just saying things like, "Boys like me, we get used to things like you. Boys like me, we don't understand lies like yours." And then underneath all of it, there's this woman who's speaking French, who I can only assume is this Zara character, as she is continually saying the name Zara over and over and over again. I mean, it's an okay song, but nothing really happens in it, which really just kind of sucks, especially after coming after a song like Crash. I mean, if this was a song that was as moody as something like A Subway Called You, or Slowcar to China, or Cry the Clock Said, and actually kind of built off of the inherent ambience of the instrumentation, I would be a much more bigger fan of this song than I am. Just the fact that because nothing happens in the song, and it just really dampens any impact it could have had on me. And then after Boys Like Me, you have the song Stories, which picks the album up a little bit. It's got this very simplistic drum machine going on, these stabbed piano parts that Gary is playing, and the funniest part to me is he's continually going, "Whatcha?" And the song seems to be about a mother and son who are meeting each other for the first time at this cafe where he's a waiter and she's ordering coffee. And the album kind of has this very like noir feel to it, just based off of the lyrics of it. And while the song doesn't really go anywhere, this is going to be one of the shorter songs on the album. And unlike Boys Like Me, Stories actually knows when to end, and it ends after this meeting kind of comes to a close, and there's the sense of closure. And then after Stories, we have the song My Brother's Time, which is going to be the last song that features Mick Karn on bass. He's playing this really thick and meaty, fretless bass line, and Gary's playing these very gentle, plaintive piano parts over all of it. And like a few other songs on this album, this one seems to also be about prostitution. Gary says in one of the lines he's lying on the floor with loose women, and there's this woman standing in the corner who whispers the words that you need. And Mick Karn, again, as well as playing bass, he also does this very haunting ethereal saxophone solo on this song, like he did on The Subway Called You. On this one, though, it's pretty much just him and this really minimal drum machine line, and it really drives home the somberness and the anguish of this song. And over the last few songs on the album, it's kind of been like fast song, slow song, fast song, slow song, and it continues that pace with the song You Are, which is one of the more fast songs on the album. It actually reminds me a lot of the standalone single We Are Glass, which was released right before the release of Telecon. Nash the Slash, again, he plays this very fun, this very loose violin part almost over the entire song. Cedric Sharpley is back behind the drum kit. He's really driving the song forward. But unfortunately, the song kind of goes on for a minute too long, with Gary just kind of repeating the line, I know how to hide and wait for you. And he's kind of singing the entire song to this person who's kind of like broken down. You kind of get a feeling that the person who he's singing to is almost like a shadow of their former self. Like this is someone who used to be a very popular person and now is just kind of a has-been. And the last song on the album is called Moral. Moral is very interesting because almost note for note, it is a re-recording of his song Metal from 1979's The Pleasure Principle. Just instrumentally, the percussion is much more stripped down, and the keyboard part is being played through this very distorted guitar throughout the song. Lyrically, though, what he's done is he's taken one of his best songs lyrically, and he's made it into this really just like stupid, pointless jab at the New Romantics. The song starts out with the line, "You New Romantics are oh so boring," and it's just like, ugh. Like at least when David Bowie did it, he did it in a way that was interesting, and you cared about what he said. I mean, like, this is the last song on the album, but it's probably the least interesting. And even as soon as he mentions that first line, I just want to skip it. I just want the album to be over with. However, there is one lyric on the album that I very much like. He says, "Just like religion, you're going nowhere." And this is one of the few instances, pretty much pre-1994, that he's going to make a swipe at religion. He's not going to do it in the same way that he's going to, say, on 1997's Exile album or 2000's Pure album. But this, as well as kind of the opening line of this Wreckage from the Telecon album, they're pretty as anti-religious as he's going to get for the next 14 years. About a minute before the song ends, it picks up. You get these live drums coming in. This one's actually played by Jess Lydiard, who was the drummer on the two-way Army albums. There was a self-titled album and then Replicas. But the song feels too out of place and too recycled and too uninteresting, really, to hold my attention for that long. And that's it. That is the Dance album. Musically, I do very much appreciate the experimentalism that Gary took with this album. I was not a very big fan of it for a long time. It took me really getting into artists like Kate Bush and like Japan to really appreciate this album. And harkening back to the band Japan, a lot of people criticize this album kind of as Gary blatantly ripping off the sound of Japan, especially an album like Tin Drum. But to me, at least, I mean, when you take a member of a band like Japan, like Mick Karn, who is so instrumental to that band's sound, and you have him play on a few of your songs, of course he is going to incorporate kind of that trademark Japan sound into those songs. I don't think that is something that Gary did intentionally, and I think that it's a criticism that he's undeserving of on this album. Instrumentally, I think this is as adventurous as Gary Numan is going to get pretty much for the entire course of his career. It's definitely as experimental as he's going to get. And, I mean, is this his best album? It's not his best album. His best album is The Pleasure Principle. but it's by no means his worst album. And almost like throughout the entire album, I just kind of want to know, like who hurt you, Gary? Like, I just kind of want to like give him a hug and just like ask him why he feels so sad throughout the course of this album. Now, I mean, being said that it's not his worst album, I will admit this is not an album of his that I go back to very often. I really only listen to this album when I'm in a specific mood, but when I do listen to it, I almost always hear something that I hadn't heard before. Like I pick up a nuance, or I pick up some kind of lyrical theme that didn't connect the last time that I heard it. I'm going to give this album a very strong 8 out of 10. This is going to be Gary Numan's best album from 1981 onward through the mid 1990s, and it's kind of a shame, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense just because like once you go this experimental, you either continue down that route or you start making the albums that people want you to make. And unfortunately, that's what Gary starts doing, starting with his next album, I Assassin. Favorite songs on the album are definitely going to be the opener, Slowcar to China. I would say Night Talk and Crash. My least favorite songs on the album are probably going to be Boys Like Me, Moral, and She's Got Claws. And that's my review of Dance. So what did you think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Is Dance your favorite album? Is Dance your least favorite Gary Numan album? Does Dance bring you back to a specific time and place? Please leave any questions and comments in the comment box below. I'm going to do the review of I Assassin as soon as possible. So, 1981, Gary Numan, Dance, 8 out of 10.